pill, orange pill, orange pill.
Gialbo is here. Gialbo.
Oh, yeah, it's amazing. Global insurrection against banker occupation. It's been taking different shapes and forms over the years, and it's certainly in the news this week. Stacey.
Right. You know, the point I want to make is that we're always talking about the Renaissance and we're talking about the Enlightenment. And one thing that we've always stressed is that it can take decades from the point where the first ideas are introduced into a population before it erupts into fruition, into a revolution and in ideas and changing of thought of the society. So, you know, 10 years ago exactly, December 2010, Max Keiser launched Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver. And the audience at the time just wasn't the right audience. It was too much Generation X, too many boomers in the audience. At that time, Generation Z was only like 10, 11 years old. At the oldest of them, maybe 12, 13 years old. The youngest of the millennial generation, you know, they were in like 17, 18, 19 years old. So I think we've finally got the right audience for it. These are the kids that were raised not on cable news, but hacking games, hacking the algorithms of games to figure out how to achieve the highest level within those games.
Right. So Crash JP Morgan Buy Bitcoin was predicated on a short squeeze.
Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver.
What did I say?
You said buy Bitcoin.
Oh, sorry. Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver was based on a short squeeze, right? In a short squeeze, okay, we're finding out what a short squeeze is this week. Now, 10 years ago, very, very difficult to explain to people what a short squeeze was because it was very difficult to explain to people the concept of selling short. Most people really can't wrap their minds around the fact that you can sell stock short. That is to say, you're selling something that you've borrowed in the hopes of buying it back cheaper, right? So this is mostly not well understood. But here you've got all these gamers and hackers online on Robinhood, and they're sharing intelligence, and they know what a short sale is, and they know what a short squeeze is, and they know how to figure out what companies are vulnerable to a short squeeze. And they figured out that this company, GameStop, had a massive short position, well in excess of the total shares outstanding, which of course opens up a whole nother question about that. And that very little buying pressure actually would start to force the stock to go higher as hedge funds that were short the stock reacted. And in fact, they drove it from something like $10 to $500 at some point, and a couple of hedge funds went bust or temporarily bust before they were bailed out. But this is activism, financial activism, as we called it, and mobilizing the swarm to take apart some of the vulnerabilities, because these markets seem impregnable to some or to mainstream media, and that there's no way that a swarm of Robinhooders could pick apart a hedge fund like this. But now we're at the stage where it is possible, and that information is now out of the bag.
Right. You know, our the subreddit of Wall Street Bets is their tagline is something like they're 4chan with a Bloomberg terminal illness. So think of this, like who this generation in large part are. They are, like we said, Z and early, the youngest of the millennials. So what they're doing is they understand games better than all of us. And what Wall Street is playing the players, right? That's how you become a hedge fund billionaire. You play the players. You don't play the market. You don't play fundamentals. You don't play earnings reports and stuff like that. You play what the players are going to do. Also, they did the same thing. They started this. We knew how powerful they were when 4chan elected Donald Trump using memes. And now they're taking down the financial markets using memes. their parents, Generation X and boomers, weren't paying attention to their children. They didn't want to have to pay attention to them. They don't have the responsibility of taking care of them and put them in the basement or in the attic and said, go play your video games. Well, these kids learned how to take down their parents and their grandparents' financial system, their political system, all of it. It has just like evaporated into nothing, right? The deplorables got rid of free speech. Okay, the 4chaners that use memes to elect Donald Trump, we've now exposed that there actually is no free speech for half the population. Now we're showing that they're showing and exposing the fact that there, in fact, are no free markets. You can only sell GameStop. You can't buy it, as happened with many of the online brokerages.
Right. They didn't do really anything much different than what was portrayed in that hit film, The Big Short. And those people were held up as heroes, and they were bankers who figured out a weak spot, exploited it, made a lot of money. And so now these online Robinhood people figured out a similar exploit, and they went in for the kill, and they were making tons of money, but apparently they were not in the club. So they've been essentially shut down. Working on Wall Street, as I have for many years, this falls under the category of regulatory arbitrage. So the regulatory arbitrage in this instance would be that hedge funds are allowed to short stock beyond what the actual float of the stock is. So there is a law against that, but the law is not enforced. And so a regulatory arbitrage simply means that there's a gap between what the law is and what law is being enforced. And in that gap, you can drive a huge position forward and make a lot of money on the illegal side of the business, but it's not enforced. So just don't talk about it. And the mainstream media and the finance won't talk about it either. CNBC. One guy, Charles Payne on Fox News, did mention that this short position that was well in excess of 100% of the total shares outstanding was outrageous. And I actually saw some comments coming from the left-wing politicians in Washington, like AOC and part of the squad, as they known, were actually pointing this out and suggesting that this was ripping people off and that maybe they should have hearings. So that's interesting development right there. Going forward, all of this, what I call monetizing dissent, going all the way back to Karma Bank. How do you monetize your dissent? If you're anti-globalization, or if you're anti-Wall Street, you're part of Occupy Wall Street, how do you monetize your dissent in a way that competing with the market, other market forces? This is part of that trend of monetizing dissent. And if the sum of all dissent monetization is going to roll into Bitcoin.
Right. And AOC, it's worth mentioning, is at the cusp of Generation Z and millennials. She's one of the, the youngest of the millennial generation. So again, like I'm saying, and she's done the whole gaming thing online, gone on Twitch and done that sort of stuff. So, that's what I'm saying is their mentality is different. And, if you grow up in that environment of gaming, you take on monsters, all those games are David versus Goliath, right? So they're not as afraid as when we first did Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver. Too many of the people in the audience were boomers or Generation X, and they're afraid of Goliath. They're afraid of these mammoths of Wall Street and afraid of regulators and afraid of the government. Whereas these kids sitting in a fantasy world know how to take on the fantasy economy of the fiat world way better than anybody who grew up born in an era when we still had a gold standard and still had memory of it. And now there's no memory of it for this generation. So they don't have anything holding them back like we had.
You mentioned the boomers versus millennials and Gen Z. Also within Congress, there's a bit of a generational split as well, because AOC is, of course, very competitive with Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi is obviously a boomer. And so Nancy Pelosi has not come out against this, and understandably, because she would be in the category of folks that would protect the status quo. So AOC, of course, there's an interceding competition going on within Congress itself. So she's like, oh, I'm going to be on the side of the Robin Hooders, maybe. I mean, she said that this week. And that's kind of interesting as well. But I do agree there is an intergenerational aspect to this. The millennials clearly are figuring out a way to get back all the money that was taken from them, particularly in 2008. Remember, Obama bailed out the creditors instead of the debtors. He moved trillions of dollars of the people's money into the hands of Larry Summers and his buddies. And now the millennials are of an age when they're going to try and get that back. And I think that if they keep down this path of financial activism and regulatory arbitrage, they're going to succeed.
I think it's called actually Nancy Pelosi is from the silent generation, like Joe Biden. That was the last fourth turning generation. Here we're Generation Z coming on board is the new fourth turning. So I think this is part of the fourth turning that we're seeing, and the upheaval and this is the reset. They are the reset. And I like all these like old people like Biden and Pelosi and all the people at the World Economic Forum saying, okay, so the kids have turned over the game and reset it, but we're going to call it the Great Reset and we own this. It's like the kids are like, okay, grandpa, right. Watch this. And any attempt by the silent generation and the boomers to try to reset in their favor, it's just going to be met with more of this asymmetric warfare that these kids know how to. This is their native environment, is this digital fictional world.
Right. I mean, think about it like this: you've got this guerrilla army of Gen Z, who are adept now at trading online, have access to these tools for very little cost. If they use Bitcoin as their base money, as collateral, let's say they keep these attacks going and they keep adding to their unconfiscatable, uncensorable Bitcoin pile. And they would take a foray into making these guerrilla attacks on these stocks one by one, the ones that have particularly high short interests. They attack it for a day or two. They make a quick 500-600%, and then they blow out of it and put a portion of that back into their unconfiscatable Bitcoin bags. That's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to stop. They haven't yet added Bitcoin to their arsenal. What I saw was very interesting from Wall Street Bets. They were actually mocking the crypto and the Bitcoin people because they felt that their focus was too diffused over all these different coins. And the thing about that makes these guerrilla attacks succeed is very strict focus on getting the economies of scale of having a huge army swarm like locusts on one vulnerable target, pick it clean and move on to the next target. But I think all those moving parts are going to be straightened out. And this guerrilla army of online hackers and day traders gamers is really going to put a dent into the system.
Because Generation X was really the one that started the whole day trading thing. These guys are beyond that. They don't we actually thought about profits and you have to maximize your profit and try to get the money. These kids are gaming. They're gaming the players. They're gaming the system. They're laughing at it. They're doing it for the lulz. They're not doing it, they're not vulnerable because any of your wants or desires that are so strong that like you need a BMW, you need a McMansion, and therefore you're vulnerable because you need to get a mortgage and you need all of this stuff and you need them in order to be a good citizen to get what they want. These kids are just like trolls that trolls don't care if you like them. That you pass under their bridge and they fart and they poop and they throw the poop at you and they say horrible stuff and they don't care that you hate them. Like this is their game world. That's the game world that they come from. So I think that's the important thing to note about here. And I think that they've exposed that something we've talked about is the arbitrary despotism of this fiat world, this Ponzi scheme that they've been trying to maintain.
Right. There's another big theme of dematerialization. So this is a gaming generation that has the same psychological and emotional attachment to a virtual digital Lamborghini, as they would have to an actual physical Lamborghini in the garage.
Yeah.
So you could spend $300,000 on a physical Lamborghini in the garage and have the sensation of ownership and thrills that come with that. Or you could have a virtual Lamborghini in your virtual garage for a cost of $3 and put the remaining $297,000 into a guerrilla attack on a heavily shorted over-the-counter stock to make another $500,000 or $1 million and to build up your war chest because you believe more in the movement than in material possessions. So the dematerialization of consumption and consumerism and the world as a whole, because so much of the economy is dematerialized in the sense of just moving software around, not attached to anything physical, that the baby boomers and the silent generation can't and won't see this coming.
Right. And the boomers, silent, and Generation X are attached to those stock portfolio gains, to their house price gains, all based on the debt that they've basically been rolling over for all these years that is allegedly supposed to be paid off by the millennials and the Z. And millennial and Z are saying, no way, come at us, buddy. Like, they're going to rip this apart in ways that we are not expecting. And that's why, because Generation X and boomers have attachment to their wealth that is entirely fictional, just as fictional as the world in which these gamers live, only we're refusing to admit it and believe it. We're trying to maintain a fraud that doesn't exist, that isn't real, that we're the ones that keep on trying. Like when the Z and millennials gave us Trump through 4chan, when they did that, what did we do? Well, we had to shut down alt media. Remember that this alt media, they're not authoritative. We are. And yet that exposed that there was never any free speech. It was free speech within a certain, as I guess Noam Chomsky would say, manufacturing consent. There's a specific narrow range of dissent allowed on cable news. And that's what you're taught, right? That's what we grew up with. These kids don't watch cable news because that's, embarrassing parents up on Facebook and watching cable news. Like, you don't go hang out with your parents. But then now they've exposed that this financial system was always rigged. It has been rigged. We saw that since 2008 when the Satoshi published the white paper. Then in 2009, when the first Genesis block said Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks. What happened back then? How about John Paulson? He was allowed to short Greece into poverty. He was allowed to make $3 billion on shorting the US subprime market. Did any regulators step in and stop him from profiting from disaster? No.
Right. Plus, you didn't have 10 years ago some innovations that are available to this generation in the online trading space. That would be number one, commissions are free.
Yes.
Number two, the cost of margin or borrowing is near zero. And number three, you have fractional shares or slices of shares. So instead of having to buy one share for $500 or $300, you can put $5 into a slice or a bit of that stock. So that just adds fuel to the fire. So again, guerrilla warfare. So they're working this with crude, rudimentary tools, but swarming and moving and being agile, defeating the empire of regulatory arbitrage as that's practiced by the entrenched hedge funds who are connected to the central banks, who are connected to the big funds like Citadel, who, by the way, has former Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke on their board. Wow. Okay. Well, that's the enemy, and the guerrilla warfare is working.
Right. Well, so let's speak about Ken Griffin and Citadel. Okay. He's, I believe, on the board of Robinhood. Robinhood is free for these little Generation Z and younger millennials, right? Here, because, we know you just have a pile of student debts and you can't get on the housing market. But okay, you can't buy a $3,000 share in Amazon. How about $3 worth? Buy a portion of it and it's free. Well, it was never free. Citadel was front running all your trades. They were scalping, just like taking pennies from your grandkids, right? This is what they were doing the whole time. But this mindset of these kids who are gamers, they walk into this game just like they walk into any game. And what do? They look around the room and figure out how to get a sword, not by confronting the bad guy character. You got to look around and find out how to figure a way to manipulate the algorithm of the game to get the sword, to get the advantage, to get the digital gold or whatever it is in the game, to get to the next level. Like, how do you get to that level? So they walk into this game of Robinhood and they know that they're being a front run, but how do we do this? Like, so as soon as that's part of that karma bank sort of way, is they force Citadel to front run their trades, shorting basically Melvin, crushing Melvin, the hedge fund, which they are also investors in as well. So
right, there's two sides of the story. So we know that the Citadel was front running the Robinhood traders, and we talked about it. But what we didn't anticipate were that the Robinhood traders would attack not the fact that Citadel was scalping them on the trades going in, but that they were Citadel also was exposed as a prime broker type service to hedge funds like Melvin. And so Citadel took a hit because their client, Melvin, took a large hit, and they had to bail them out for the tune of 2 billion or more, 2 or 3 billion.
Yes.
So net, I think Citadel took a hit on this operation. So all the pennies they collected, it's penny wise, pound foolish. They made a lot of pennies scalping Robinhood traders, but the Robinhood traders then took their pound of flesh by bankrupting Melvin.
Right. And so every time the peasants start to revolt against the elite of any system, whether it was back in the days of the Roman Empire or the Dark Ages during when the Vatican ruled, or the Enlightenment and the French monarchy, they always try to hit reset, right? Because this is the funny thing that's going on with this. Davos met, and they had it was all about the Great Reset, but these kids are the ones resetting the system. And I want to turn to a comment from the Orange Pill Podcast Telegram group, and that was Jason the Normie Hunter. He said, GameStop, stop the game, restart, reset, great reset. Is it a psyop, or do I just need to take my meds? So GameStop, okay, the game stops. And that's the powerful thing, is if it is a game, right? And I guess it always has been, because we did have debt jubilees and things like that. There was a notion that you can just restart, right? Like, just let's start again. This whole thing has gone horribly wrong. And these kids are way ahead of us on this notion where, Generation X and boomers are so deep into their fantasy, they think it's real, and they're not willing to give up all the trappings of the success within the game. Like if you're already at the top level of the game, the top layers, and you have all the gold stars and you're the highest rating on the pinball, like you're the number one guy, you don't want them to reset, right? Because then you go back to the start and have to compete with these people.
Right. I mean, like, to use an older game, Monopoly, once you have hotels on Boardwalk and Park Place, you don't want to reset the game because you're going to win this game. Right. So the GameStop, I mean, it's very poetic to make this comment that we stopped the game is stopped, we're resetting the game. And I think that this generation believes that they can reset and they can stop the game. And once that belief takes hold, it becomes a powerful meme, a movement, if you will, that is going to sweep through this entire huge demographic. And they've got the access, they've got the financial literacy now, they've got the technological literacy, they've got the urgency, they've got the need, they've got the anger. They saw what happened in 2008. All their future was stolen. And they were told to stop eating avocado toast and everything will be great. Just save your pennies while we steal your billions. Well, guess what? They figured out how to strike back. And I think the genie's out of the bottle.
Right. NASDAQ CEO suggests halt to trading to allow big investors to recalibrate their positions to combat Reddit users. So it is Wall Street versus these Reddit users, and it's being positioned as combat. Obviously, the regulators and all of these institutions are on the side of these Redditors, but you can clearly see that faith in institutions is gone. There's no way you can force through silencing and deplatforming people, by banning 4chan memes, by doing all that stuff that China has tried over in their country. Like, that's not going to work because these kids already have no faith in your institutions. So how do you get them to believe, right? How do you get them to believe at this point? Well, you can't, because they see that they're winning and they see that they're better at this game than you are.
And it's been another repeated theme throughout history. The younger generation tends to figure out how to establish their leadership and supremacy over the preceding generations. And we've seen this all the time. And I guess this speaks to the fourth turning, which everyone's been talking about in the last few months, as things are cyclical. And we're at a stage now where the old guard is collapsing. And we've got a new generation that's figured out how to take back all the cash that was stolen from them. And it's going to be a rocky road for everybody. But if you're young and you've got a lot of energy, it's a lot easier to go through the war than if you're old and decrepit and can barely remember where you left your glasses. It's tough to go to war when you're 60, 70, 80 years old. That's why they send young people to war. So these young folks, yeah, it's going to be hard for them, but they'll come out of it fit, rich, and having won.
Stevie Cohen's fund is down 15% in January. All these hedge funds, because, that's how they make their billions, is they basically, are able to short these markets. Unlike, it hasn't been as easy for retail to do that sort of activity, though they're offering options and all sorts of stuff to retail now as well. But, that's the thing, is once their game is exposed, like, you can't use it anymore, right? They can't do that. So if these kids are taking down Stevie Cohen,
yeah,
and Citadel and things like this, like, how do they restart the game? What do they do?
Well, look, insider information is notoriously difficult to prosecute. And we know for years now that the big hedge funds like Stevie Cohen and the other hedge fund guys get together once or twice a year, and they openly discuss companies that they're going to sell short to death. Like GameStop was a company that was in kind of a dying brick and mortar industry. The company was worth maybe $5 billion or something like that. Hedge funds decided, you know what, we can just sell the stock short down to zero and force the company into bankruptcy, and we'll never have to cover our short because it'll go bankrupt. And let's just all do it together. Let's collude, right? So there's anti-competitive laws and anti-monopolization laws, and all these things are in place that would prevent that from happening. But because they're so cozy as political donors, and they gave a lot of money to politicians, and Stevie Cohen just bought the New York Mets, right? So he's an institution for New York. He's going to save the Mets, right? They're turning a blind eye to the collusion, the criminal activity, and it's a cozy game that's very profitable. And you don't see that happening in the retail space because retail investors don't have the economy of size to get together and say, we're going to sell short this company to death and we'll all make $10 billion collectively. But through the Reddit Wall Street bets swarming of the global population of financially literate activist financiers now, with armed with their Robinhood apps, they can compete and even defeat the hedge funds. So, the hedge funds are obviously going to get Congress to try and pass new laws or to get rid of some laws to make it easier for them to continue the game. Or I think the more likely scenario would be that this army of guerrilla financial warfare warriors will start to use Bitcoin as their honeypot, as their war chest, which is unconfiscatable and uncensorable, which is huge for Bitcoin. Bitcoin, of course, I have a $220,000 target in 2021. Based on some seismic events happening, dollar crash or guerrilla warfare breaking out over the counter NASDAQ, something like that, like a huge fourth turning type event that suddenly this Bitcoin thing gets rocking into the 200,000s.
And I'm wearing my silver necklace because, this is their next target because of censorship via the apps like Robinhood and Cash App and Schwab and the others that prevent them from realizing their gains and declaring victory in these battles with the hedge funds of Wall Street. They're having to turn to the physical markets where it's, hundreds of thousands of mom and pop bullion dealers around the world. So it's not like you can, you're going to have to send in thugs and goons and brown shirts to close all those shops, right? To stop this next phase. And, I might add that Max and I, for the past 18 years, we've been pointing it out. It's been there for all to see that these vulnerabilities were there. When we did the Crash JP Morgan Buy Silver campaign, it was because, JP Morgan held a short position that was far greater than all the annual production of silver per year. So that left them vulnerable. They no longer have that position because of us. They closed it out and they own a lot of silver now. But those sort of crimes, those are technically not allowed. Those are illegal, right? You're not supposed to be naked short, but they were, and they are, and they continue to be, as these Redditors have pointed out. So what do you think, with all these young people, all these Redditors, I think the silver story is a good one just because of how small the market is. You can buy, an ounce for $30 or less, and half an ounce for even less, half of that. You can go smash buy at swanbitcoin.com/orange pill. We've got our own URL. Yeah. We're so excited about that. I finally got orange pill as our affiliate link.
Before Bitcoin. This is after Bitcoin. See? Before Bitcoin, after Bitcoin. Hey, Max, why are you using me as a model in that dumb ad? I think you don't pay me anything for that, and you put me in that advertisement, and I'm not getting residuals, you cheap fuck. Where's my chicken feed? Where's my duck feed? Lucky, I've had enough of you. You go back over there. You come back for the ad later. Swan never complains because he gets to be a swan.
Well, let's go to our guest, Simon Dixon. All right.
Yeah, baby.
Hey, Simon Dixon. Everybody in the Orange Pill podcast group knows you, of course, so you need no introduction. However, before we get to the heart of this interview, we have been asked by dozens and dozens of people in our Telegram group if you could please explain your set.
This is we're in the age of home studios, right? So this is my home office. If I'm going to be buying furniture, I like to invest in stores of value other than not just Bitcoin alone. So this is what the house looks like now.
Did you pick this up from the Gaddafi estate sale?
No, we picked it up from Bliss Dixon. So she can take responsibility for this one.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really a standout kind of visual thing, and the home studio looks great. And this is, as you say, the era of home studio. It's also the era of home hedge funds, and everyone's a hedge fund, and everyone's on Robinhood app, and they took these hedge funds down. The hedge funds have been blowing up because the Robinhood apps have been buying into stocks that were sold short. Now, we've been covering this for a while, Simon Dixon. We talk about how it's legal for hedge funds to actually sell shorts more stock of a company than there is in existence by simply printing sale orders. And so the Robinhood app guys figured this out, and a company like GameStop went from $8 to $500. But isn't this, give me some perspective on this, because you have a history of banking. You and I were at the first Bitcoin conference of 2011. You wrote the book, Bank to the Future, which mentions Bitcoin, the first book to actually mention Bitcoin. Doesn't this give everybody really the bottom line reason why Bitcoin is so important? Because it is uncensorable, it is unconfiscatable. Simon.
So much to unpack there, Max. What a fascinating story. So, yeah, as you said, I did used to work as a market maker. And when I was a market maker, we had the ability to go naked short. And that meant that we could, the compliance and the back end office team needed to go find the stock after we were already short. And so as a market maker on the London Stock Exchange, we would have this book of penny stocks. And our job would be to create trends, push prices up, push prices down. Then we could try and buy and sell and guide people into what they should be doing. Some could call that market manipulation. Another word for that is market making. The way it used to work is we used to go short a stock, and then the back office would have this big book of stock that they needed to find. And if they couldn't find it, then they were naked short. That practice, although it happens. But the fascinating thing I think about this story, and I should disclose, as a shareholder in Robinhood, isn't it fascinating that the retail can actually outperform the hedge fund now? But what I think is really a couple of things. You talked about the Bitcoin case, and I really do think that ties into the Bitcoin story. But before the Bitcoin story, it's a free market story. So, we've decided now that the Federal Reserve can intervene as much in the stock market as it wants. The Federal Reserve can say, we're not letting the stock market crash, and they can pump the stock market however. But because they've got such vast resources, they can do it in a more organized fashion. And yet when retail try and pump a market because there's a post on Reddit and they're trying to get on squeeze out a hedge fund manager that's on the short side, all of a sudden, free markets, doesn't count again. And they want to shut down the app and they want to control the markets to try and make sure that the hedge fund manager wins. This is just the exact example of where we are. The economy today is the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. And when Robin Hood comes along and allow the poor to actually start investing in stocks, they make sure that the hedge fund manager gets their investor protection. And yet, the retail are told that they're not allowed to do that. So it's just a classic example of how the stock market is no longer a free market. It is a Federal Reserve ran market who's trading against your hedge funds. And if the hedge funds get it wrong, then they ring up their mates at the Federal Reserve and they have this short squeeze.
Right. Yeah. Just to kind of elaborate on that a bit. We know, for example, in the precious metals markets, particularly in the silver market, there have been documented cases of naked short selling, that is selling sell orders that don't exist on ounces that don't exist. We know that Patrick Byrne over there at Overstock, he made a big story of this 10, 12 years ago, went to war with the short sellers, proved that they were selling stock that didn't exist to manipulate his stock overstock, and pointed out that there is a regulation called Reg Show, that's SHO, which is the regulation that pertains to naked short selling, which is illegal. But as you point out, these rules are not enforced. I remember Eric Holder under Obama, he was the attorney general. He came up with the doctrine that banks are too big to jail. He basically laid the groundwork for this idea that big banks are above the law and they can commit crimes any way they want to. But also, aside from being Bank to the Future and all those activities, Simon, you're also one of the first person to get into alternative financial media. So let's talk about media's role in all this, because what you describe as hedge funds committing fraud, selling short stock that doesn't exist to manipulate the price and pocket that profit is aided and abetted by the mainstream financial press like CNBC that have these guys on their shows to tell lies and to distort the truth to make it easier for them to make money. Simon, we've seen that for years and years too, right?
Yes, I mean, there's so much happening right now, and really, the censorship conversation and the control of media, because the traditional media was getting less and less relevant. Obviously, the pandemic made everyone start watching the news again, and everyone started watching the news. I guess the media starts to get a sign of a recovery in their business model, so they can start selling some more advertising again. But prior to that, the trend was only going in one direction. People were just, the next generation didn't really know what a news channel was. They were just watching everything on social media. And so really what we're seeing is a couple of things. Firstly, the control of big tech and the censorship conversation, which is really a very important conversation, especially in the era of, the Trump censorship as well. I think Trump is, when he was the president of the United States, his job was obviously to pitch the dollar and the importance of the dollar. So he was never bullish on Bitcoin and he was always pitching the dollar. But now what becomes really interesting in a day and age of censorship, and also he was experiencing the same thing that WikiLeaks experienced when they first started using Bitcoin because of the financial blockades. And now Trump is no longer president. It becomes really interesting to see what his next moves are and I do think that now he doesn't need to push the dollar. Now his job is not to push the dollar. We might see the censorship conversation driving into the financial censorship resistant conversation, which is one of the problems that Bitcoin set out to solve, giving you the ability to own your own money, spend your own money without censorship, and also the fixed money supply. So what could be more relevant today than stock markets closing you down, owning your own money, censorship happening both in the media and the traditional big tech companies, censorship resistance, and excessive money printing, which is fixed money supply. Why people are asking, why does Bitcoin go up to $40,000? There you go. There's the story. Bitcoin's involved in all those stories. They're the big three trends, and they're the big three problems that Bitcoin solves.
Right. Let's pick up further on that, because in case people don't know in the audience, not only was the president deplatformed from social media by all these big tech companies, He then, as soon as he left office, he was kicked out of his banks. His banking services were cut off from 4 major banks, cut him off. We had the collaboration between AWS, Amazon's AWS, YouTube, all these services that cut off any option that Trump himself could possibly do. Like, they always say, well, Twitter is a private company. They could do whatever they want. Trump could just do his own sort of Twitter. Well, no, he can't, because then they cut him off. They won't allow him banking services. They won't allow him web services to host this. So, where do you see that going? Because there does seem to be a building trend over the past decade. Max has called it GIABO, global insurrection against banker occupation, of the people, especially the younger people who were not, as you mentioned, raised on cable news, while the Generation X and boomers were watching cable news and all the propaganda. Like, these kids were in their basements playing games and figuring out how to hack algorithms. That's one thing that was pointed out with this Robinhood Reddit story. These kids spend their whole days trying to figure out how to manipulate a game to get, a sword or a piece of digital gold inside the game. And they're doing the same to the boomer system set up around these algorithms, a financialized system. So it seems like there's a building conflict on the social media side, free speech denied to some deplorable people. Now we're seeing financial services cut off for the deplorable people of Reddit, who they were only allowed to sell their shares in GME and GameStop, for example. They were only allowed to sell. They were not allowed to buy, which is remarkable, right? Because that's the end of free markets.
Yeah. And, this is really where the economy seems to be going. It's this friction. It seems like we've hit a point of inflection where the world needs to decide, does privacy matter? Does freedom matter? Do liberties matter? And the world needs to decide. And these debates are are happening right now. And they're hitting this climax of, I guess, accelerated by this global pandemic. But it's bringing to the front all of these conversations, which have been slow trends, where everything's moving towards this two-tiered economy. And so, people ask, what's the big deal about Bitcoin and blockchain? Well, it has its role in all of these conversations where it's driving these central bank digital currencies where the central planners are trying to co-opt the technology and use it for central bank digital currencies, which are powered by artificial intelligence, which have gateway drugs of universal basic incomes. And people have to opt out of all their freedoms and enter that economy, enter this central bank digital currency-led economy where everything you do and everything you care about is taken away for the convenience of getting some money in an economy where the poor are getting poorer and they have no choice but to opt into that system, versus the decentralized economy where you have money that you can own, money that you can spend, and then the applications that can be built on top of that of really, if you could put it in two things, you've got this debt-based economy, which is driving that inequality. And then you've got this, on the reverse, this wealth effect, where through sound monetary principles, wealth is being redistributed to those that get in. The earlier you get into Bitcoin, the bigger the wealth effect has actually been. And you've got these two forces that are kind of battling it out. And thank God that Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency that actually wasn't created by somebody that had a door that you can knock on that can be censored, because that's the only reason why we have this dynamic here today. And so you've got this two-tiered economy, and one of them is getting more and more centrally planned, more and more control, more artificial intelligence taken away, and then the other is driving more and more freedoms, liberties, and privacies for people, and it's getting more and more private and getting better and better at that. So thank God, because imagine what world we would live in today if it wasn't for that.
And of course, one of the things that has happened in America over the past few years is these fintech giants like Robinhood, they've allowed a sliver of a share. So even though the stock price on GameStop went up to $500, you could buy $5 worth. So the hundreds of millions of people could still participate in this action against hedge funds. And I also saw on Schwab, one of the online brokerages with 0% commissions, what they did, they have a search term, like the most popular search terms. And this morning, the top 6 were 5 of them were for the companies that were no longer tradable, that were pulled off of the exchange, that you could not buy because of this campaign. And number 6 was Bitcoin. So it's funny how the road is leading everybody to Bitcoin. This unrest, this uprising that really started with Bitcoin introduced in 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, because this is exactly what we're seeing today. Back then, we saw the same exact sort of action as hedge funds being bailed out, for example, in Greece. So the bondholders of that Greek debt, they were made 100% whole. A free market would have seen them get 20 cents on the dollar, maybe 10 cents on the dollar. Instead, they got 100 cents on the dollar. And the ordinary citizen of Greece was forced to pay all of that debt that they should have been able to renegotiate as a huge debtor, right? They weren't allowed to. The same thing now we're seeing today is the markets got shut down and the small holders on Robinhood were forced to let the hedge funds slip away.
Yeah, and it's all a consequence of a Federal Reserve led, US dollar that has been going through this experiment of 0% interest rates in order to try and protect people's 401ks by pumping funny money into the stock markets and pumping funny money into the real estate markets. When the reality is that when people can no longer afford to buy their own real estate, they can no longer afford their own homes, the market has a corrective mechanism that says those that invested at prices too high, you have to have a correction in the wealth effect so that other people can actually get on the property ladder. But what we've said is no, put some 0% interest money out there. Let's create this crazy experiment with the entire global economy, and let's drive us from a free market capitalist-led environment to socialism and something that's looking progressively more and more like communism. And that's a global trend. I said on the last show when we were with you, America every day is looking more and more like China, and China is looking more and more like America. And they seem to be converging into this quasi-socialist ideal. And now you've got Janet Yellen, at Treasury, and then you've got the merger between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. This is a pretty crazy time. This is one of the most interesting times in financial history. And I think, to me, this is the time when you, Max and Stacey, that have been reporting on these trends completely ahead of the curve, preparing people for these things. I don't think you're ever going to run out of content. No wonder you must be so busy, and the content never ends, because this financial system is really becoming a turning point in financial history. We're seeing history in the making.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you've been making great predictions ever since your book, Back to the Future. You predicted, and that came out in 2010, you predicted a crisis in 2020 period, and certainly that was spot on. Now, you've also said in a recent podcast with us, you talked about bankers protesting in the streets. And the reason I bring that up is that what we just saw was a version of that, because the bankers, the hedge fund managers, couldn't take the fact that they were outsmarted by the Robinhood traders. So they went out, and started crying and protesting on the streets like big babies, come and help us, save us, blah, blah, blah. Is that kind of what you're talking about there?
Yeah, well, wait till we see what happens when the central bank digital currency starts wiping out the bank's business. Because remember, the banks are in the business of digital currency. They invented digital currency. Every time you took on a mortgage, every time you borrowed money from the bank, they created a digital representation of the government's currency. And so we created this debt-based Ponzi scheme, which was regulated, the world's largest regulated Ponzi scheme that we've ever seen. And now it hits a point where everybody's looking to the central bank's balance sheet to protect the economy. The government's looking to the central bank. People are looking to the government. So everyone's looking at that. Now, what happens when these banks, some of them, they fortunately for the bank, not for you, probably sold off all their toxic assets to your pension. So they're sat in your pension. But what happens when these universal basic income and these schemes that people are relying upon because of this wealth inequality start to reach the stage where they can no longer do it? We either we either move towards everything being funded by the government, or there's a bit of pushback on that. And if there's pushback, if you put up interest rates, if you stop some of these schemes, the economy grinds to a halt. People can't pay their mortgages. All of these toxic assets that are sat in people's pensions or on banks' balance sheets start to expose their ugly little head like they did in 2008. But this time, rather than having bail-ins, rather than having bailouts, because I think that will be the next set of riots, the central bank just comes along and say, don't worry, people, download our currency. You can opt out. We can let the bank go bust. You have banks rioting in the streets trying to say, hold on, this central bank digital currency, we don't want you issuing currency. We want to issue the currency. We want more debt-based Ponzi scheme. And so that's the friction that we have to face at some point. And then, these hedge fund managers and the people revolting against them is just a little movement and step in the direction of what I think we eventually see with bankers riot the streets as the central banks eats their lunch. At least with banks, money was one step removed from the government. They can stop that in an instant. That's where the economy's going.
Right. Let's talk about something else. And again, as long-term observers in the Bitcoin space, we go back to the 2011 period. We see when new people come into Bitcoin, they go through these stages of denial and they regurgitate some of the old FUD that we've heard starting in 2013, 2014, 2015. Now you've got a higher class of FUD coming from people like Janet Yellen or Christine Lagarde, who's now at the ECB. But they go through the same stages of FUD, and some of them graduate to becoming Bitcoiners. Like Ray Dalio, he started out as a Bitcoin basher. Now he's saying he's going to start a new crypto fund with Bitcoin. Michael Saylor in 2013, he hated Bitcoin. Now he's one of the biggest cheerleaders of Bitcoin. So these Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde are trying to put out the FUD on Bitcoin. What are some of the main FUD points that we're going to hear over and over again that you can quickly dismiss, Simon?
Well, firstly is that, it's for money laundering is the one that you're going to come from the central banks. Geez, we've had that one from, really from the early days. The reality is that while Bitcoin will work on being more and more private, it's really not a great place to do crime. Plausible deniability, if they can connect your identity to a wallet address, then you've got an immutable record of what you do. So, I'm surprised that we're going through that one again, but we've had that one right from the beginning. And then that's used to make people fear and FUD them into selling their Bitcoin because they think that governments are going to ban it. The reality is, as we've seen over the years, is that banning it. So we've been through this experiment. We went through that when China started deciding to ban the Bitcoin exchanges, which was interesting because they allowed mining, and mining is where you take your fiat money and you buy computer equipment and it spits out Bitcoin with no KYC and nothing in the middle. So it's interesting they allowed that, but then they banned the exchanges, and the exchanges are regulatable companies because Bitcoin isn't regulatable. There is no door to knock on. There is no one to request information from, and there's nothing you can do to do that. So they have to regulate the exchanges. But when China decided to ban the exchanges, what happened is all of the Chinese population that were buying Bitcoin went over to signed up to the exchanges on Korea, and they did peer-to-peer. And then they started looking at the exchanges in Japan. And Japan knew what they were doing because Japan had Mt. Gox and CoinCheck, which were two very large exchanges that went through a big hack. Therefore, they'd been working on regulations because they were the first ones to get goxed, Japan, the country. And so, what this drives us to is really what governments want is they want the next money grab. And where's the next money grab? The next money grab is taxing people with crypto wealth. And if the government want the next money grab, their only choice is to collect as much data from the exchanges. And the exchanges are the people that are onboarding and offboarding people from fiat to crypto. And then once you're in crypto, you can exit and you carry on in the crypto economy. But the banning argument is just really dumb because rather than banning it, we've seen that it then just creates all the job opportunities and all the innovation to another country. And in an environment of currency wars, Bitcoin can be used as a political tool, just like companies are protecting their balance sheet from the dollar right now. Other governments and other central banks can protect their balance sheet from the dollar. China would be a perfect example of that by owning Bitcoin and saying that they're holding it as reserves. And the wealth effect that we saw in countries like Bulgaria, when they ended up owning more Bitcoin than the entire national debt of the country, is an opportunity for other countries that are struggling right now. So you get these, this banning is highly unlikely to actually happen on a global coordinated basis. Because you lose all the data and you lose the ability to get the next big tax grab. As the market cap goes from 1 trillion and beyond, that's a lot of money for governments that they want to tax on. So I don't see that happening, but that's one of the big fears. What else do you have? Quantum computing, this theoretical thing that can take down Bitcoin in 100, 200 years from now. Well, it also takes down the banking system, the nuclear power plants, the CIA, the Fed, the governments, and everything else with it. So if that actually happens, Bitcoin isn't really a big problem, but then the community can hard fork towards, a quantum resistant version of it. So, what else have they got? We're just regurgitating the same objections, but the cold hard reality is that Bitcoin in the short term is a highly manipulated market. So those that want to accumulate Bitcoin in the long term need these events that fool you into selling your Bitcoin so they can accumulate more. And that will continue to happen. And we get this government-wide, money laundering. And the IMF itself actually dispelled that one when they did a report on the drop in the water of money laundering that happens in Bitcoin versus what happens in banks. So, Max, what else have we got? We can dispel as many as we want.
Right. They also noted that year over year, that drop in the water actually reduced in size. It went from less than 1.5% to less than 0.5%, I believe. So it's really, as you point out, a terrible way for criminals to transact.
At least at the moment. And as you mentioned, there are new privacy tools being introduced to Bitcoin. But I wanted to point out that the Central Bank of Singapore has just said that Bitcoin will probably replace gold as a store of value. And on top of that, all these massive US investment funds and banks, including JP Morgan, are coming out with like really bullish price targets. I mean, more than anything you and Max have even called, right? I mean, you saw JP Morgan call for $650,000 Bitcoin. You saw a few in the $300,000 range. Guggenheim's Scott Minerd was saying 400,000. And of course, Bitcoin, that he said that when Bitcoin was 10,000. And then now he's dissing it, trying to, because he's not allowed to buy until the 31st of January. So he's trying to get the price down. But when BlackRock, which is the largest investment fund in the world, the biggest asset manager in the world, and they have an amazing amount of power over the political system in America. And there, many executives from BlackRock actually have joined the Biden administration. When BlackRock is now going long Bitcoin, I mean, doesn't that reduce all that FUD? Doesn't that mean like there's no way the United States government is even going to try to ban it? Like these people are more powerful than the government.
Yeah, so you've got two forces. You've got the first force is the wealthy and high net worth. So the interesting thing about Bitcoin is everything worked in reverse. You had the hackers and the activists that got in first. Then you had retail that got in later. And then we had the pension funds and the hedge funds and all of the financial institutions that just stuck on the side. So I actually did a tour. Jefferies Investment Bank asked me to go and speak to all of their fund managers that were managing most of the money in the world. And at the same time, Blythe Masters, the creator of the either the credit default swap, I think it was.
Yes.
She was telling everyone, was it credit default swap
Yes.
or CD?
It was credit default swap she created, yes.
Okay. Whatever toxic acid is. Then she was telling everyone it's not Bitcoin, it's blockchain. And I was telling everyone it's not blockchain, it's Bitcoin. And we had a direct roadshow with competing messages. But all of them went on and ended up buying some Bitcoin on their personal account. But they've been sat there waiting to get it in their fund because they've got all these regulations and bureaucracy and custodian relationships and, how to store it and multi-sigs and all these things that it's great for individuals to own, but it's very hard for a corporation. And so what happened with Michael Saylor is that, he went through that process of figuring out how does a public company buy Bitcoin? And he was crying and wondering that, is the story going to leak before I get my Bitcoin? And now you've got all these companies that are scrambling around trying to figure it out. So it created this reverse effect where the corporations got in next, and then you have the hedge funds. So as soon as you have the ability for institutions to own, which already many of them do, as we're seeing with products like GBTC and various other, just adding billions and billions to their funds under management and their assets under management every week. Then you have the ETF. And once retail are in, we've seen the trend is that the Federal Reserve will do anything not to blow up people's 401ks, and they'll give up free markets and all sorts of stuff. So once you have these financial products in, and you've got BlackRock in, and you've got Wall Street in, and you've got institutions in, and you've got public companies in, and you've got retail in, then the likelihood of trying to make something like that illegal and disappear versus just regulate and tax the products and the exchanges is just highly unlikely to me.
Right. Talking about Michael Saylor there. So he's got an event in Florida, in Miami. And by the way, the mayor of Miami has put his Bitcoin flag in the ground and said, we are going to be the global Bitcoin city. All Bitcoiners come to Miami. He is hosted a copy of the white paper in response to the latest Craig Wright drama. They posted a copy of the white paper on the official Miami website. So he's total solidarity with Bitcoin. But anyway, Michael Saylor is having a big event. He's inviting up to 1,000 CEOs. And the message is, here's the playbook we used to turn our cash reserves out of fiat into Bitcoin. These companies have got trillions sitting there idle in what Saylor calls the melting ice cube, losing purchasing power every day because of inflation. Have you heard about this? What do you think the impact might be? Is this another seminal event in the history of Bitcoin, Simon?
Yeah, well, Michael did, he really kicked off the wave of the corporate interest in Bitcoin. It just took one brave person. You had Paul Tudor Jones really kicked off the interest from hedge fund managers. I guess it's just global tribalism. You look for your guru and your leader to tell you. Keiser report was the very first where Max and Stacey covered Bitcoin at under $3 or whatever it was at the time. A bunch of people started discovering Bitcoin. Well, Michael Saylor was, I guess, the one that got all the corporations in. Paul Tudor Jones was the one that got all the hedge funds in. And then what I'm looking for is the next country that will be the one that gets all the other, and the first central bank that will be the one that ends up getting all the other central banks in. But yeah, it makes perfect sense. Take a portion of your dollar reserves, and Michael Saylor has been going around telling everyone, where are you going to put your dollars? And the only story that made sense is taking some of it and putting it into Bitcoin.
Wait, I think I understand the furniture now. You're starting your own country.
Oh no, not. I don't want to get into politics. So.
No, I was just joking. I think you're right. The next step would be for countries, and this, of course, Simon, is baked into the Bitcoin Genesis block. It's a layer in the tech stack called the game theory, and we've seen game theory. Walk us through this. This is also an interesting history because the game theory was first the hackers were battling each other for supremacy. In the first 2 years, actually, Bitcoin from 2009 to 2011, it wasn't guaranteed that it would survive the internecine hacker wars. Mike Hearn and others were battling it out. We had others, luminaries in that bout. Then we went to the mining wars where, oh my God, China's got all the hashing power, but now a lot of it's moving over to Texas in the United States. So that was, we see game theory working there. We see the corporate game theory now. So in your view, now the game theory jumps to that sovereign level, and I guess the sovereign wealth fund level, like Qatar and Norway and these other funds. Is that what we'll see in 2021 as well, do you think?
Yeah, and don't forget the hard fork one as well. So we had to prove that Bitcoin's money supply couldn't change, and then we had the hard fork battles, and then Bitcoin just becomes resilient. And Bitcoin has got a way of punishing the people that take the other side of these bets. And yeah, I think we'll see that in the sovereign side, the game theory side. Yeah, as you said, I mean, there were times when it was highly unlikely. I remember when we were doing after the Mike Hearn situation when he rage quit. I think we did a Keiser report on that very thing. Yeah, there's all these different stories. So as more and more people come in, look, here's the facts. Bitcoin, more and more people each year need to own their own money. More and more people need to spend their own money, and more people need something that can combat, that can be reliable as a fixed supply. And so you get all of these game theory scenarios coming in. As the majority of the world started out, as everybody did, a skeptic. And we all started as skeptics. So we're not just going to buy into or believe in this thing. One by one, you start to realize, hey, it's not a Ponzi scheme. Oh, right, it's not a scam. Oh, it's not a currency just for drug dealers. Oh, it's not just a get-rich-quick scheme. And one by one, more and more people realize it. The day that everybody realizes it is the day when probably Bitcoin acts like gold, and it can be a median of exchange and unit of account and not have such a wealth effect. But we've still got billions and billions of people to discover that, which is what creates this game theoretical situation where new people come along, they don't know the history, and the history dealt with all of those different types of objections, and there's very little new that comes along. But then one by one, they need to learn them, or they need to experience it firsthand, that Bitcoin tends to recover. And people talk about the volatility of Bitcoin. It's very volatile if you're a trader or you're looking at the short-term price. But to me, it's just a 12-year bull market. Look at the chart from day one to today. It just looks like this. It's a 12-year bull market.
Yeah, it just has an upward bias. That seems it's going to continue that upward bias for a long, long time. And the short-term volatility should really be ignored unless you're a trader. And nobody really wants to spend their time day trading Bitcoin when they can just sit there and watch it move up on average 200% a year for over 10 years, right? This is the most outstanding asset that's performed really probably in 1,000 years. Simon, over there, Back to the Future, you have a front row seat to technology in Bitcoin, and you've been instrumental in bringing a lot of these companies to the public sphere. And, these days, when I want to buy Bitcoin, I can buy it instantaneously on my Swan Bitcoin app, and then it's swept automatically into my Casa multi-sig wallet. I mean, remember back in 2011, when we were starting, that was not the case, Simon. The ability to buy Bitcoin was extremely convoluted. The ability to store safely your Bitcoin was extremely difficult. But you, of course, were very good in identifying companies that were part of the infrastructure build out of this industry. So what do you see now from the investment banking side of the business that you're and Bliss are involved with? What are some of the trends now in the next 2 or 3 years on the infrastructure side, on the tech side, on the VC side that you see? What are some of the technologies that we will be noticing in the near future after they've gone through that Back to the Future pipeline?
Yeah, so there was that initial phase where it was just about making Bitcoin easy to buy, and then you had companies that came along, and you had the exchanges were the big winners for us. They were what made 99% of all the wealth effect. Well, two things made the wealth effect with our investors. Firstly was Bitcoin. We had some very early innovative products, a Bitcoin-based bond that paid out Bitcoin every day, and a Bitcoin fund that paid out Bitcoin every day. That created a bit of a wealth effect. And then that was diversified into many of the companies that became the billion-dollar unicorns. We obviously had lots of failures along the way as well. But then you had the exchanges, and they started creating these ginormous wealth effects. Companies like Kraken, with companies like Bitfinex, with companies like Coinbase. And that created the next wealth effect in the Bitcoin space. And then it started to really focus on infrastructure to support institutional onboarding. So custodians and all of the infrastructure. I do think the next wave, and I know this might be a bit controversial for you as a Bitcoin maximalist, but we're starting to see interesting trends around the DeFi space. And that certainly can be an experiment on Ethereum that ends up on Bitcoin. But I do think that the decentralized financial space, although people are launching tokens and doing lots of scammy things, and it's certainly not, something that everyone can use, and there's all sorts of, but the philosophy of what it's trying to do, of allowing people to use your Bitcoin as collateral. At the moment, you need to do weird things like wrap it up in Ethereum and access different lending products. But the whole point here is that Bitcoin becomes this savings-based economy, and you can collateralize with your Bitcoin. And then you've got all this innovation that happens to have happened on Ethereum now, but then people are trying to replicate the same effect on top of innovation on top of Bitcoin. But then to have the ability for you to take every single financial service and do it in a way where you can use Bitcoin as your collateral. I mean, how does the traditional financial system work? Well, it's all based upon debt. It relies upon everyone taking on ever increasing levels of debt in order to create more money, in order to drive you into debt-based products and repackaging, rehypothecating, and everything you can do. With Bitcoin, it's all about punishing you ruthlessly for selling your Bitcoin, because we all have a Bitcoin pizza guy story as we do it. And then in the end, you end up using it as collateral, and then the entire plumbing of the entire financial system can be rebuilt, but based upon a savings-based economy. So I see this debt-based traditional fiat money that's also driving people into the loss of privacy and all sorts of things and a dangerous direction. And then you see people that have had this wealth effect with Bitcoin collateralize it and then have financial products that serve every single financial product built in a more decentralized way. So I think you will see regulatory crackdowns on this. And that's why you end up in a situation where you have the fringes of innovation. You have decentralized financial products, and then you have security tokens. And these are new, growth sectors that I think you'll start to see more and more of in the next 4 to 5 years as it goes through.
Right. And one final point here. I know you're an investor in Coinbase. What do you expect? What sort of price are you looking for their public offering?
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. So, the whispers are, and, I don't really have any inside information. That's a huge corporation at this stage. But yeah, being an early investor, I reckon that they're looking with the growth that they've experienced, with the growth of Bitcoin and the market. The rumors are, the whispers are that it's going to be approximately $70 billion. And then when we start to see the Reddit effect that we've started to see in some of these stocks, and as the price of Bitcoin goes, it becomes, the first way of getting a pension fund level exposure in the public markets. And then I think you see a wave of mergers and acquisitions. Many of our portfolio companies are being, consolidated into some of these larger organizations. And then I think they'll wave the path for many more IPOs in the industry, and then more and more institutions and pensions can invest in this industry, and retail, of course, which turned out that they're driving the markets. So yeah, I think Coinbase has been just it's just showed what valuation increases you can get. And I remember there was a time when some of these companies were raising at valuations like 125 million or 250 million, and people were seen as absurd valuations at that time. But now we're starting to see some of these valuations that can be achieved when you rebuild the entire financial system and you get a foothold in that sector.
Thanks so much for being on Orange Pill Podcast.
Yeah, Simon, that was great. And hopefully when this pandemic is over, we'll be visiting you and to one of these great conferences and catch up in person.
Jesus, what's that? I can't remember what it's like. I've been locked up for so long. I don't remember what human contact is like outside of Zoom.
You might be going insane, Simon. And that might explain some of this fixation on very large red leather chairs and an enormous ornate clocks. You know, he might be going absolutely mad.
Yeah, it is what it's doing to me.
Well, that was Simon Dixon in his very interesting new set. You know, he needs one of these he needs a gold chain around his neck.
Yeah, I think we're going to start seeing Simon now with like those hats you see African dictators wearing, like a leopard skin cap with some big jewelry, you know, like totally gangster. You know, this is the real Simon Dixon. He's a global gangster of Bitcoin capitalism. And this is where it's all headed. You know, this is fantastic.
Or else he has, as you suggested, gone crazy.
Maybe he's gone crazy. You know, he's like the Colonel Kurtz out there, and he's gone absolutely mad. He controls like half the market right now. I mean, he's become like the go-to guy. He's at the nexus of everything that's going on.
Right. Speaking of the nexus of everything going on, have you subscribed to orangepilldailydose.com? Because that is kicking butt, really. Have you been following it, Max? Have you been receiving our daily dose?
I really look forward to it. About 10 o'clock in the morning, boom, boom, boom. It's in the mailbox. I think it's going to be coming, 5 days a week? 5 days a week, I think.
It comes every day of the week. Weekends we take off.
Yeah. So that would be, 5 days a week. I think it comes Monday through Friday, and it's there in the mailbox, and it's really good. I mean, it's a great little newsletter because it just has like 5 or 6 key bullet points, some great graphics. You go through it in a minute or two. You get something right away. It's like, it's a nice hit of what's happening in the Max and Stacey Orange Pill world. And I look forward to it. You know, there's a couple of other newsletters I get to, and I keep getting them in my mailbox, and I never read them because I don't want to spend more than 3 minutes.
No, and we have all these nice photos and images, and that's the thing. Also, it's put together, it's assembled by the team at Swan Bitcoin. And I think that's important because it's hard to see yourself, like, especially what is the most interesting things you said. That's why I love with our podcast, our Orange Pill podcast Telegram group. I love it. We have these artists like Rick Stoner, Vizik, Geek Boy, and they're able to get the essence of any content of ours in a way that we can't say ourselves or see ourselves, because they're looking at us from their own perspective, but as an artist perspective. So I like to have, that sort of French existential quality of being defined by others. Like you can't define yourself, that only others can define you in a way that is presented to the world.
Yeah, well, it's fun because there's a feedback going on. So like we'll look at a Rick Stoner or Geek Boy meme, based on something we're doing. And then it's like, oh, I'm actually now, that gives me another idea.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of give and take, and it's a kind of a creative collective in that way, which is fun to do. And we have a really nice community. And, with the Telegram group, we kick out all the Karens and the shitcoiners, which is good because the vibe is important. And Stacey does a good job with the orange sparkly shoe, making sure we get rid of the Karens and the shitcoiners. And, we're going to get 18,000 in that group pretty soon, and everyone's on the same vibe, and so it's got a good feeling.
It's just the downers, the people who are like all negative because it's a game. We're all on a journey, and think about any teen horror film. Like the people who end up getting killed are because they're like by the monster is because some like Karen's like, I can't do this. Oh, let's just go back. Let's just do this. And you're like, that's the moral of the story. These are foundational stories to human civilization as we travel across the centuries and travel
across. They should make a horror film called Teen Karen.
Teen Karen. Yeah, because you don't want those. Like this is a great reset. They see it. The boomers and silent generation see it. They're identifying what is happening. But we're in charge of this narrative. We're in charge if we want to. And I think a lot of Generation X are too scared. We've always followed in the footsteps of whatever the boomers want. And the boomers have given us these amazing house price gains and portfolio gains based on their Ponzi scheme. But, the victims of our Ponzi scheme are fighting back now. and you've either got to join them and like get on that side of the revolution, renounce the elite, renounce the monarchy and Marie Antoinette, like, you know, Marie Antoinette of the world, like, you know, Rachel Maddow is going to be throwing, you know, brioche to these peasants.
Right. Well, all the Robinhood traders, of course, they're active in the United States because foreigners can't actually buy stocks in the United States. All very hard
Plus,
to do.
they don't have free speech.
Yeah.
Well, like we've just shown that we don't actually have free speech either, theoretically, if big tech unites against you and joins on the side of the silent generation and the boomers.
Right. But nevertheless, the global insurrection against banker occupation covers more, 3 billion people potentially. And there's only, there's silver, of course, is a global asset that can be mobilized to fight the banksters, but Bitcoin is the preferential asset. A higher Bitcoin price goes, the more the banks and the central banks are defunded. And it's a global movement. So that's one thing that they can't stop. I mean, the regulators can stop to some degree or go to war with American Robinhood traders. And there's a little civil war going on within the boundaries of the United States. But, as this thing spreads globally and people understand that Bitcoin, which is unconfiscatable and uncensorable, and that becomes their reserve asset from which they launch their sorties into attacks on various over-leveraged companies or over-shorted companies, and then they build up their treasuries with the profits. This is something that cannot be stopped, really. And I think we're on the cusp now of this global insurrection against banker occupation. We're seeing there really the first battles, the shot heard around the world. I think that was in Concord, Massachusetts, that started this revolutionary war of America against the English occupiers. I think we've got that right now with this week.
But again, and the final words here, I want to say that these are, you're seeing the mindset differences. And once that faith in that setup, whatever it is, whether it's the Vatican ruling the world or the French monarchy ruling France, like once you stop seeing them as divine and that the way as it should continue to be, well, that's when it just disintegrates. It goes away. It's over. The Great Reset has happened, and these actors still on the stage are just in denial. They're just wandering around zombies, trying to keep their zombie economy, their zombie money, their zombie financial system alive. It's all a zombie, and the kids have already gone on to the next game, and you're over. That game is over. Those are just like the little flashing remnants. Remember on the old computers when you'd still see some like sparks on the screen from it, as it took a while to shut off? Well, that's like, they're like an old computer that took, it used to take like 5 minutes to shut down your computer. It would just like slowly shut down.
Right. Exactly. Just fade away. Wow. This is awesome. I'm so excited. This is the beginning of something fantastic.
Right. Maybe do something like push that microphone away because, our meme artists need some images of you. They complain that there's not enough images of you. We need you looking at me. We need that side view. We need your other side view, and maybe grab your chicken because the chicken always looks good in your.
Is that a sexual reference?
Choke your chicken. Choke your chicken, man. We need some images because
hey, baby, I'm gonna choke my chicken. Yeah, I like the way you look.
Because we can't.
You're a sexy broad.
We can't take down the central banks with just some silver, some Bitcoin, some forced short squeezes. We need some memes. We need some memes.
Sanders personally, that he's a good friend of mine. And Kansas chicken. It's also it's a business I started. I'm a multi-billionaire chicken entrepreneur, baby.
You're a multi-billionaire chicken entrepreneur.
Let me show you the town. Let me take you out for dinner. And we'll have it. But I don't want any chicken. We'll have anything but chicken. Maybe a couple of steaks. You got too many cows out there. What do you think about that? Huh? Baby, come on, baby.
Remember, this is the Great Reset, and these great resetters in the boomer and silent generation were trying to push you on, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. You won't ever eat chicken again. You'll eat our goop because we destroyed the real world.
Beyond chicken. Eat that Beyond Chicken shit. We don't need the real chicken. Leave the real chicken to us. That's right.
Bye. Say goodbye. Bye. Bye. Bye.